Hi guys, it's Jess and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. Today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for the month of May, and as you will be able to tell if you've watched my other videos, I am in a new filming location today because I am in my study, which is not quite finished. I've still got a few different things to do before I do the big reveal and room tour, but I wanted to film in front of my books seeing as they are now out, although I'm still playing around with the best place to stand for the lighting and the backdrop and everything, so if this changes in my next video then do bear with me. But as I said, this is my wrap up for the month of May, so let's jump right in. So the first book that I read was Finnegan of the Rock by Melina Marchetta, and I absolutely adored this book. It was everything that I thought that it was going to be. I think I mentioned in my May TBR video, which I will link in the description box down below, that I had a good feeling about this book, and it was proven completely correct. So this is a fantasy book set, now I always kind of thought before going in that it had a very Celtic setting, and I definitely got those vibes from it, but I wouldn't say that it was a Celtic inspired fantasy. That wasn't quite right, although I do think that that was how I chose to describe it in my TBR video. So this is a fantasy book in which a world is split into different realms, and one of those realms, Lumitere, has basically come under a curse, and so you have the people who are living in Lumitere who were trapped when the curse was cast, and then you have people who were trapped on the outside. Basically the curse was cast after the royal family was slaughtered and an imposter king took position and started killing a load of the local people, and so one of them cast a curse, and it was like a big black rolling cloud, and so some people were trapped inside Lumitere and other people were trapped outside, and the exiles have been going from realm to realm basically trying to find somewhere else to settle, not really able to forget that they have friends and family trapped on the inside of this curse. And that is where Finnegan comes in, because there is a prophecy which basically says how the curse will be lifted. And Finnegan is one of the exiles. He has been travelling from realm to realm trying to find a permanent place for all the exiles to live, but at the same time having to realise that he is intrinsically part of this curse being lifted. So it's kind of a coming of age story for Finnegan of realising who he is. He has certain memories and certain expectations of himself based on his experiences and when the curse landed, and he has to accept and step up into who he really is. There are some great characters in here. I loved that it's the type of fantasy book that you can just hit the ground running with. There was a little bit of world building, but it was quite similar to our world, so there wasn't a whole lot that you had to get involved with. Yeah, and it was just written really, really well. I really enjoyed the characters. I did guess one of the big reveals quite early on, but that didn't spoil my enjoyment of the story at all. I just thought that it was a really, really solid fantasy read, and I've already purchased the second two books, which I think pick up the story from where it leaves off, but kind of from the perspective of other characters that we've already met in this book. So yeah, very, very excited to carry on with this, and I really, really enjoyed it. The next book that I picked up was The Passenger by Lisa Lutz. This is a suspense thriller novel, or a psychological suspense novel. I don't know whether I would class it as a thriller. There wasn't really any spine-tingling element to it particularly, and you know that I would say if there was, because I can only take so much spine tingling in my novels. But this basically follows the story of our protagonist Tanya, who goes on the run when her husband falls down the stairs and dies, and she thinks that she is going to be accused of his murder, and you basically begin to understand that Tanya is running from more than just the possible accusation that she was responsible for her husband's murder, but that she has a much deeper and darker secret in her past. And I enjoyed this novel for what it was. I read it around the time that I had my wisdom teeth out, so I couldn't really have concentrated on anything too in-depth. But in terms of suspense and thrillerishness, I feel like it felt a little bit flat. I think the overall story and the secret that Tanya was running from, when it was revealed, just didn't really do it for me. I kind of just thought, is that it? And there is a character in this, which I won't go into too much detail because if you want to read it, I don't want to spoil it, but I can't quite get on board with the actions that this character does. She makes some decisions and she does some things and they're just so far-fetched that she wouldn't be caught out in doing them, that I just couldn't suspend belief enough to get on board with them. So this was just an okay read for me. I thought that it was fine for what it was. It didn't blow my socks off. It didn't make me think, ah, it didn't have me on the edge of my seat. And yeah, I just thought the ending maybe fell a little bit flat. I was expecting something slightly more from it. But if you enjoy psychological suspense novels, then perhaps this might float your boat. The next book that I picked up in May was the Bookish Mama's pick for the month of May, and that was The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, if you follow me on here, you'll know that this was a very highly anticipated release for me, and I loved it. I think on Goodreads, I left a comment saying something like, I don't know whether this is a 4-star, a 4.5 star or a 5-star, I just need to process, because so much happens in the latter half of this novel that I just needed time to process what had occurred and what I had read, and I just was left feeling a little bit overwhelmed by it all. So this is set in the 70s and it's about a family who move to Alaska when civilization is only just kind of emerging in Alaska. There are no real towns or no real cities, nothing has emerged there, and the father in the family is a recovering prisoner of war from Vietnam, and he suffers with what we would now call PTSD, but obviously back in the 70s that wasn't really something that they were aware of, and he is constantly losing jobs. He has a really bad temper. He's unable to provide a stable environment for his wife and his daughter, but they love him greatly, and so he decides that he wants to kind of go on this new adventure, and they move all the way up to Alaska and try to eke out an existence in what is a very, very unforgiving environment. And they meet an amazing community of people there who are immediately on their side and immediately welcome them in, and for a while things go really well, and then the PTSD starts to creep in again and things kind of unravel from there. And I loved this book. As usual, Kristen Hanna does a fantastic job of creating characters who get under your skin even when you don't like them, and that might be because they're meant to kind of be the bad guy, or just because they're making really stupid decisions and you wish that they would just wise up a little bit. They still manage to have an impact on you, and I just thought that this was a great book. It's not on a par with The Nightingale for me, but I still thought that it was a really, really good read. My only criticism, I suppose, of the book is that it is very, very slow moving, and as I mentioned earlier, most of the action takes place in the very, very last few chapters of the book. But I thought that it was incredibly moving. I thought, as I said, the characters were really, really well done. I loved that this was a book essentially about strong women. You've got mum and daughter who are each facing their own battles and their own journeys in their individual ways, but they also meet other really strong female characters as well, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, just overall I thought that this was a fantastic read, and if you are a fan of Kristen Hanna, then I would highly, highly recommend picking this one up. Then I picked up my first Neil Gaiman book, and that was The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and I adored this book. If all of Neil Gaiman's books are like this, then I am going to thoroughly enjoy them. This is a magical realism slash fantasy book, and not very much happens by way of present day plot. We start the story with our protagonist who has gone back home for a funeral, and he goes to revisit a place from his childhood, and from there a whole torrent of memories emerge for him that he had suppressed or just not remembered before he arrived at this place at the end of the lane. And it was just fantastic. I really, really enjoyed Neil Gaiman's exploration of childhood memories, how they can change and morph, how we choose to remember things. There's an interview with him at the back of this book where he goes on to talk about his interest in memories and how the way that we recount things that have happened will never be the same from person to person. So something could happen to me and something could happen to you at exactly the same time, but our experiences, our interpretations, our recall of them of that one event would be completely different, and he does that really well in this book. Yeah, I have no criticism of it at all. I took it at face value. I just went on the journey that it took me on, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that Neil Gaiman's writing was really fluid and easy to get into. And if you haven't picked up any Neil Gaiman, then I think this one is probably a good one to start with, because it wasn't very long. I think it took me a total of 2 days, if that, to read. Yeah, and I just really enjoyed it. And then the final book that I picked up this month was Dear Mrs. Bird by AJ Pearce. This was a book which I was sent a ARC of in April, and I was really looking forward to reading it. I feel like a lot of the books that I read this month were quite heavy, so I was looking for something a little bit lighter, and I thought that this would tick the box. We are basically following the story of Emmeline Lake, a young girl who is living in London during the Second World War, and she lives with her best friend Bunty, and Bunty works for the War Office, and Emmeline has a dream of becoming a lady war correspondent, and one day she answers an ad in a newspaper to go and work for what she believes to be one of the biggest publications of the time. But it turns out that she's actually going to be helping an agony aunt, Mrs. Bird, answer letters, and Mrs. Bird doesn't like anything even slightly unsavoury or unusual or modern in her letters, so she picks things which are very staid and very boring to Emmy. So Emmy decides that she is going to start answering some of the letters herself without anybody knowing, and from there kind of unfolds this whole scenario. It's kind of a coming of age story where Emmeline has to kind of find her place. It's kind of a light-hearted exploration of the Second World War. There's a lot of kind of capitalized phrases talking about doing your bit or keeping your chin up, and all of the kind of slogans which were toted out around this time of the Second World War, and how the people of London really, under the worst of circumstances, kept up their spirits and kept going despite everything that was going on around them. But there is a darker side to this novel. So I say that it's a light-hearted look at the war, and that's almost seems really odd, and it seems like it's downplaying what happened, but there is a more serious element which I'm not going to say because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who decides to read it. But there is something more serious in this book which explores the impact that the war had on just pretty much everybody who lived during that time period. You know, everybody knew someone who had been impacted or was impacted directly themselves, and so it does touch on that a little bit. But overall, I thought that this was a really fun, easy to read novel. I thought that it was really amusing. I did think it went on a little bit. I feel like it could have been a little bit shorter, or there could have been a bit more plot going on, but yeah, overall I just thought for an alternative World War II story, this one was really quite interesting. And it was alternative not in that it was groundbreaking or that it told a story that you wouldn't have thought about before, but it's just a different look at the way that people dealt with the things that were going on during the Second World War, and I for one really appreciated it. So there you go, they are the books that I read in the month of May. Do let me know what your favourite book from the month was. Let me know if you read any of the same books that I did. I always love to chat more in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to give me the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all very soon.